Okay, so here we are inside of After Effects, and the very first thing I do on every project is create 3 folders for organization. The first folder I create, I come down here to this folder icon, I put a star so it stays at the top, and I call it Render Comps. These are going to be my main and final compositions that I'll actually send out to render. I'll create another folder, and I'll call these Pre-Comps, and this will be anything that's nested inside of our Render Comps. In the last folder, I title it Assets. If we're working with footage or still photos or you name it, they'll go in this Assets folder. And if we need to, we can further break this down into subfolders. So now let's get started creating our first rectangular graphic all from scratch. First thing I want to do is if I select this Render Comps folder and create a new composition, we'll call this Rectangular. We'll make sure our settings are set to 1080p, 1920 by 1080 wide. 15 seconds should be plenty of time. A frame rate of 30 is great for what we're working with. And we'll go ahead and we'll press OK. And you can see since we had our folder selected, this comp automatically gets placed in the Render Comps folder. And if we wanted to, we'd come to the end here. We could actually type render so we know that this is the final. So let's create our first element, which will be our main square background. I want to create this using shape layers instead of using a solid, because this will give us a few more options for animating down the line. A nice way to make sure we have a good size is if we come into this icon here, we turn on our proportional grid, we'll get this nice grid, and we can make a nice even rectangle. So we can press Q on our keyboard to bring up our rectangular shape tool, or we can come up here to our shape tools. You can see that we have all these options. We want the rectangle. If we press Q repeatedly, you can see that we actually cycle through these options. Getting to know your keyboard shortcuts will save you a lot of time in the long run. So we'll stick with the rectangle here. We'll just come into this cross, we'll click and we'll hold and we'll drag. We'll come down here to where these 2 points intersect. And we'll let go. We've created our first element. We don't need these grids anymore, so we'll go ahead and we'll turn them off. Now, if we scroll into our shape layer here, into this contents of rectangle 1, and into the path, we can see this is about 960 wide by 360 tall. So let's just go ahead and even these out, because it's a lot easier just to work with nice, clean shapes. And so we also want to make sure that this is aligned right to the center of our composition. So go ahead and we'll select our shape layer. We'll come into our Align panel here. If you don't see it, come up to Window, Align, and we'll align it to the horizontal center of our composition and the vertical center of our composition. We were pretty close to begin with, so it only moved a little, but now we know that this is directly in the center. And we'll go ahead and we'll title this Rectangle, just so we can stay organized. Now if we press U on the keyboard, it'll hide all our parameters, so we have a nice clean slate to work with. The next thing I want to do is I want to create our bars on the outside. For this, we can use solids. So we know that our rectangle is about 360 high, and we want these bars to be a little bit bigger than that. So we'll go ahead and we can press Command Y on the keyboard or come up to Layer, New, Solid to create a solid. We'll go ahead and we'll make this white as well. And we'll call it Bar 1. A width of 10 is good. And again, we want that height to be about 450 so it extends past the height of our main rectangle. We'll press OK. And we'll take this and we can press P on the keyboard to bring up our position parameters. And we can just go ahead and drag this to the left. If we hold Shift on the keyboard, it'll drag faster. So why don't we go ahead and make this an even 400. And now we want one on the other side, and so we'll go ahead and duplicate this layer by pressing Command D on the keyboard or coming up to Edit, Duplicate. And now if we want to make sure this is the same distance, we're going to have to do a little bit of basic math. So we know that the center of this composition originally was at 960. So in order to get 400 from 960, we had to subtract 560. So in order to get this even on the other side, we just need to add 560. What's great about After Effects is it'll actually do this math for us. So we can just come in to our X position here and we can type plus 560 and press enter. And now we have some evenly spaced bars. Now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and pre-compose all these elements. So I'll select them all by dragging or pressing Command A, and and I'll press Shift-Command-C on the keyboard, or I'll come up to Layer, Precompose. And we'll just call this Precomp Rect for rectangle. We'll press OK. Now all our elements are inside this rectangular precomp. The reason I did that is because I actually want to distort this image, but I want to distort everything that's happening. So if we come back into our render comp here, I'll go ahead and move this precomp into our precomp folder. We can come over to the effects panel and we can type warp. We can come down to here to this warp effect and we can drag that onto our composition. Now, this isn't exactly what we want, so we just need to change the style here from arc to fisheye. And now you can see we have a little bit of bulge around the corners of our objects. And if we want more, we can drag this bend up, and if we want less, we can drag it down. 50 actually seems like a good number. So the reason I did this was now that anything we do inside this precomp will be warped in our render composition. So we can come back into our precomp here, and we can continue to work.